The winter of 1879 was merciless across the Montana Territory. Blizzards swept through the plains like vengeful spirits, burying homesteads and claiming the unprepared. But nature's fury paled compared to human cruelty. This is the story of Eleanor Miller, who gave birth alone in a cabin as snow piled against the door, only to be cast into the storm with her newborn by the very people who should have protected her. And it's the story of Key Yazzie, a Navajo trader who found them half buried in snow, a chance encounter that would challenge everything both believed about survival, belonging, and what makes a true home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. December in Montana brought darkness by mid-afternoon. In a two-room cabin, nestled against the foothills of the Bitterroot Mountains, the lantern light flickered across wooden walls as Eleanor Miller gripped the edge of her bed, her knuckles white, her breath escaping in small clouds, despite the fire crackling in the hearth. 26 hours of labor had hollowed her out, leaving her drenched in sweat despite the cold seeping through every crack and crevice of the cabin. Eleanor's nightgown clung to her skin, soaked through with sweat and blood. Her auburn hair, once carefully pinned, hung in damp tangles around her pale face. She had been alone when the pain started, her husband Jackson having ridden to fetch his mother from the neighboring homestead 5 miles away. That was yesterday. The child, a girl, lay swaddled in a tattered quilt beside her, impossibly small with wisps of dark hair and skin still mottled from birth. Eleanor reached out with trembling fingers to touch the infant's cheek, warm despite the chill that permeated the room. She had not yet found the strength to name her. "She's beautiful," Eleanor whispered to the empty room, her voice raw from hours of labor. The baby's eyes remained closed, her tiny fingers curled into fists. The sound of horses and voices broke the silence. The cabin door banged open, bringing with it a swirl of snow and the imposing figure of Agatha Miller, her mother-in-law. Behind her, stamping snow from his boots, came Jackson. Neither looked at Eleanor or the child. "Well?" Agatha's voice cut through the small cabin like an ice pick. She was a tall woman, her back rigid despite her 60 years, her grey hair pulled tight beneath a woolen bonnet. "Is it done?" Eleanor nodded, attempting to sit up straighter against the pillows. "A girl," she said, trying to keep the pride from her voice. "Healthy and strong." Jackson moved to the stove, holding his hands out to the meager heat, his shoulders hunched against his mother's reaction. He didn't look at his wife of 3 years, or the child he'd supposedly wanted so desperately. A girl. Agatha's mouth tightened into a thin line. She crossed the room in 3 long strides, peering down at the infant with undisguised disappointment. "After all that waiting, after all our planning." Eleanor's chest tightened. "What does it matter?" It matters," Agatha snapped, "because we needed a son. The Caldwell land adjoins ours to the east. Their boy needs a bride. That was the arrangement. Now we have nothing to offer them." Eleanor stared at her mother-in-law, comprehension slowly dawning. You wanted to marry our child to the Caldwell boy before she was even born?" Jackson still wouldn't meet her eyes. "It would have doubled our holdings," he muttered. "Give us water rights to the Eastern Creek." "She's a child, our child." Eleanor's voice rose. "Not cattle to be traded." Agatha's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Everything is traded out here, girl. Did you think your father sent you to marry Jackson out of love? He owed us for those horses that died crossing the pass." She shook her head. "At least you had your uses. This girl child gives us nothing." Eleanor clutched the quilt tighter around her daughter. Exhaustion and pain made her thoughts sluggish, but anger sharpened them. "She's your granddaughter. She's a mouth to feed through a winter that's already looking to starve us." Jackson finally spoke, his voice flat. "And you weren't supposed to give birth yet. Not until spring, as if Eleanor had chosen when to bring life into the world, as if she had any control over the matter at all. "The storm's getting worse," Agatha said, moving to the window. The glass was frozen over, the view outside obscured by ice and darkness. "We'll need to butcher that old mare tomorrow for meat. No one's getting through the pass until the thaw." Eleanor looked to Jackson, hoping to find some softness in his face, some recognition of what they'd created together. Instead, she saw only the same hard calculation that his mother wore. "I can work," Eleanor said, though her body screamed in protest at the mere thought. "As soon as I'm recovered, I can—" "You weren't brought here to work," Agatha cut in. "You were brought to give us sons, and you've failed." Eleanor fell silent, cradling her daughter closer. The baby stirred, making small, mewling sounds that tore at Eleanor's heart. She hadn't chosen this life, this marriage to a man 15 years her senior, who had appeared at her father's door one spring day with promises of land and prosperity. A man who had hardly spoken to her on the month-long journey west, and even less during the 3 years they'd been married. Jackson poured himself a measure of whiskey from a bottle kept on the high shelf. He drank it in one swallow, then poured another. His eyes, when they finally landed on Eleanor, were empty of the hatred she might have understood. Worse, they were empty of anything at all. "You should rest," he said finally, the first kindness he'd offered since entering. "It'll be a long night." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters. Eleanor closed her eyes, suddenly too exhausted to argue. She needed strength, needed sleep, needed to recover enough to protect her child from whatever coldness this family intended for her. When she woke hours later, the cabin was dark except for the dying embers in the hearth. The baby slept, soundly beside her. Eleanor's body ached, her mouth dry as dust. She sat up slowly, listening. Jackson's snores came from the other room, where he shared a bed with his mother when the weather was too bad for her to return to her own cabin. Eleanor slipped from the bed, her legs shaking beneath her. She needed water, needed food, if she was to keep milk for the baby. She moved carefully across the wooden floor, avoiding the places she knew would creak. A flash of white caught her eye, a piece of paper on the table, illuminated by a shaft of moonlight that managed to penetrate the frozen window. Eleanor approached, squinting in the dimness. It was a letter, addressed to the Caldwells. She read it, her heart sinking with each word. "We regret to inform you that the arrangement can no longer proceed as planned." They had already written to break the agreement, already decided their daughter was worthless. Eleanor's hands shook as she put the letter down. Beside it lay a pouch. She opened it to find a few coins, barely enough for a week's supplies. Understanding crashed over her. Like ice water, they meant for her to leave, to take the child and go. Before she could process this betrayal, the door to the bedroom opened. Agatha stood there, her nightgown ghostly in the dim light. "You've seen then," she said, nodding toward the letter. "You can't mean for us to go." Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "There's a blizzard. The stage will pass through Abernathy's Ford in 2 days' time, heading east. You'll be on it. 2 days. Eleanor couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I can barely walk, and the baby, the child, is your concern, not ours." Agatha's voice was iron. "Jackson has made his decision." "And what decision is that?" Eleanor demanded, finding strength in her anger. To cast out his wife and child in the dead of winter? To protect what's his? Agatha stepped closer. "The Caldwells won't take kindly to this news. They might call in other debts. We need to present a united front, and you're a reminder of failure." Eleanor stared at the woman who had never once shown her kindness. "You're sending us to die. I'm sending you back to your people. That's enough mercy. My father sent me because he couldn't feed another mouth." Eleanor's words tasted of ash. "There's nothing for me there. Then find something elsewhere, but not here, not anymore." Eleanor gripped the edge of the table, dizziness threatening to overtake her. "When?" Tomorrow at first light. Agatha turned to go, then paused. There's dried meat in the pantry. Take what you need for the journey. Jackson will drive you as far as the crossroads. With that, she disappeared back into the bedroom, leaving Eleanor alone with the crushing weight of what was to come. The baby whimpered, sensing her mother's distress. Eleanor moved to her, gathered her up and held her close. "Lily," she whispered against the soft crown of the infant's head. "Your name is Lily." She gave her daughter a name that spoke of spring, of resilience, of beauty that returns after the harshest winter. That night, Eleanor didn't sleep. She gathered what little she owned, a dress, a shawl, a pair of worn boots. She found a small sack and filled it with jerky, a half-loaf of hard bread, a tin cup. She wrapped Lily in every scrap of cloth she could spare, then bundled herself. In the threadbare coat Jackson had given her 2 winters ago, by dawn she was ready. Not willing, never that, but ready. Jackson said nothing as he loaded her meager belongings into the wagon. The snow had stopped, but the cold remained, bitter and biting. Eleanor climbed up beside him, Lily tucked inside her coat, close to her. Hot. They rode in silence through a world transformed by white. Tree branches sagged under the weight of snow, and the horizon blended seamlessly with the sky, creating a vast emptiness that reflected Eleanor's future. At the crossroads, Jackson stopped the wagon. There was no shelter here, no sign of life for miles around, just 2 rutted paths disappearing into the wilderness. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "The stage comes through around noon," he said, not looking at her. "Follow the southern road. There's a way station about 3 miles down." Eleanor stared at him, this man who had shared her bed for 3 years and now abandoned her without remorse. "Why?" she asked simply. Jackson finally turned to her, his face weathered and lined beyond his 40 years. "My father built that homestead with his bare hands, died defending it from raiders. It's all I have. And we're nothing to you." He looked away. "You were supposed to give me sons." Eleanor climbed down from the wagon, her body protesting every movement. She stood in snow that reached her knees, Lily silent against her chest. "I hope your land keeps you warm at night," she said quietly. Then, gathering the last of her strength, she turned and began walking south. Jackson didn't call after her. She heard the wagon turn, the horses snorting in the cold air. The sound faded, leaving only the crunch of her boots in the snow and Lily's soft breathing. The vastness of Montana stretched before her, beautiful and merciless. Eleanor walked, one painful step after another, time blurring as she focused solely on moving forward. The way station? She had to reach the way station, but 3 miles might as well have been 30. Her body, still raw from childbirth, betrayed her with each step. The cold seeped through her clothes, numbing her fingers and toes. Lily began to cry, a thin wail that tore at Eleanor's soul. "Hush, sweet girl," she murmured, trying to shield her daughter from the wind. "We'll find shelter. We'll be warm soon." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. There was no shelter here, no warmth to be found, just endless white and the growing realization that Jackson had sent them not to a new life, but to their death. As the sun reached its zenith, Eleanor stumbled. Her legs, numb with cold and exhaustion, gave way beneath her. She fell to her knees in the snow, clutching Lily to prevent her from being crushed beneath her. "No," she gasped, struggling to rise. "No, please." But her body wouldn't obey. She managed to crawl to the base of a large pine, its lower branches creating a small hollow in the snow. It wasn't shelter, not really, but it was all she had. Eleanor leaned against the rough trunk, cradling Lily close. The baby had stopped crying, her face red from cold, her eyes closed. "Stay with me," Eleanor whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Please, Lily, stay with me." The world grew dim around the edges. Eleanor fought to stay conscious, knowing that sleep in this cold meant death. But her strength was fading, her eyelids heavy. Her last thought before darkness claimed her was that at least they would go together, she and her daughter. At least they wouldn't be alone. She didn't hear the approach of hooves in the snow, didn't see the tall figure that dismounted and knelt beside her, didn't feel the strong hands that gathered her and Lily up, carrying them away from their frozen. Yazzie had not planned to travel this road today, but sometimes the wind spoke, and a wise man listened. Warmth. That was Eleanor's first sensation as consciousness returned. Steady, gentle warmth that seemed to cradle her like a mother's embrace. For a moment, she thought perhaps she had died, that this was the afterlife her preacher father had spoken of. But then came the pain, her body reminding her with sharp clarity that she was very much alive. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open to an unfamiliar ceiling of timber and clay. Light danced across it, golden and flickering. Fire! She was near a fire. Memory rushed back. The snow, the cold Lily. "Lily!" she gasped, trying to sit up. Pain shot through her and strong hands gently pressed her back down. "The child is safe," came a deep voice, calm and steady as a mountain stream. "She sleeps." Eleanor turned her head toward the voice. A man sat beside her, his face illuminated by the fire's glow. His features were strong, angular, deep-set eyes that reflected the flames, high cheekbones, and skin the color of burnished cedar. His black hair was pulled back from his face, revealing a small turquoise stone hanging from one ear. Not white, not a settler. The realization came with no fear, only confusion. "Who are you?" Her voice was a rasp, her throat parched from cold and thirst. "Yazzie," he answered, offering her a wooden cup of water. "Drink slowly." Eleanor tried to take the cup, but her fingers were stiff and clumsy. The man, Key, held it to her lips with surprising gentleness. The water tasted sweeter than anything she'd ever known. "My baby," she whispered after drinking. "Where is she?" Key nodded toward a small bundle, nestled in what appeared to be a cradle board, decorated with intricate beadwork. Eleanor could just make out Lily's tiny face, peaceful in sleep. "I fed her," Key said, following her gaze. "Goat's milk. She was hungry." Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes. "Thank you," she managed, the words wholly inadequate for what this stranger had done. "You saved us." Key made a small gesture with his hand, as if to brush away her gratitude. "The snow spirits would have taken you both. It was not your time." Eleanor took in her surroundings properly now. They were in a small dwelling, not a cabin like she was used to, but something with rounded walls and a central fire pit. Various herbs hung from the ceiling rafters, drying in the warm air. A loom stood against one wall, a half-finished blanket of blue and gold stretched across its frame. Weapons and tools hung neatly on pegs, a bow, a knife, various implements she couldn't name. "Where are we?" she asked. "My winter home," Key replied. 2 days' ride from where I found you." 2 days. Eleanor had been unconscious for at least 2 days. The realization was staggering. "You carried us all that way," Key nodded once. "You had a fever, the child too. It was not safe to wake you." Eleanor tried to process this. A stranger, a native man, had found her and Lily dying in the snow, had carried them for days to his home, had fed her child and had tended their fevers. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Key looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he rose and walked to the fire, adding another log. The flames leapt higher, sending shadows dancing across the walls. "People believe all life is connected," he said finally, "like strands in a web. To harm one is to harm all." He turned back to her. "To save one is to honor all. It was a philosophy unlike anything Eleanor had heard in the harsh world of frontier survival, where people measured worth in acres and livestock, where a woman's value lay in the sons she could produce. "I'm Eleanor," she said, feeling she owed him at least her name. "Eleanor Miller, and my daughter is Lily." Key nodded in acknowledgement. "You should rest more. Your body still heals." As if his words had summoned it, exhaustion washed over Eleanor again. But before she surrendered to sleep, one more question pressed upon her. "The stage," she murmured. "Did it come at the crossroads?" Key's expression shifted slightly. The first emotion she'd been able to read on his face, something like anger, quickly mastered. "No stage has passed for many days," he said quietly. "The snow is too deep in the mountain pass." The truth settled over Eleanor like a weight. Jackson had known. He had left her and Lily at a crossroads in winter, claiming a stage would come, knowing full well it wouldn't. He had left them to die. Single tear slipped down her cheek before sleep claimed her again. For 3 days, Eleanor drifted between consciousness and dreams. When awake, she would find Key tending the fire, working with tools, or sometimes just sitting in contemplative silence. He spoke little, but when Lily cried, he would bring her to Eleanor without being asked. On the 4th day, Eleanor woke feeling stronger. She managed to sit up on her own, propped against soft furs and blankets that smelled of cedar and sage. Key was at his workbench, carefully etching designs into what looked like a piece of bone. He glanced up when she moved, his eyes assessing. "Better today," he observed. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "Thank you for your care." He inclined his head slightly, then returned to his work. Eleanor watched him for a moment, struck by the meticulous precision of his movements. There was a peace to him, a centeredness she'd never witnessed in the frantic scramble of settler life. Lily began to stir in her improvised cradle. Eleanor started to rise, but Key was already moving, lifting the infant with practiced hands and bringing her to her mother. "She grows stronger each day," he said, as Eleanor took her daughter. "A fighter, this one." Eleanor looked down at Lily's face, the perfect bow of her lips, the dark lashes against her cheeks, now pink with health rather than red with cold. "She has to be," she whispered. Key returned to his seat, but didn't immediately resume his work. Instead, he watched as Eleanor unwrapped Lily from her swaddling, checking her tiny fingers and toes as if assuring herself they were all still there. "The man who left you," Key said after a moment. "He was your husband?" Eleanor's hands still. "Yes." "And the child is his?" "Yes." She rewrapped Lily, her movements more hurried now. "Yet he abandoned you both to the winter." Eleanor didn't answer immediately. How could she explain the complex web of expectations, disappointments, and cold calculations that had led to her abandonment? How could she make this man, with his different values and worldview, understand the particular cruelty of settler society? "My husband's family needed a son," she said finally. The simplicity of the statement belied its weight. "For an arrangement with another family, land and water," right? She stroked Lily's cheek. "When I had a daughter instead, I became worthless to them." Key was silent for so long that Eleanor thought he might not respond. When he did, his voice was low, contemplative. "Among my people, children are treasures, boys and girls alike. They are the future, carrying our stories, our ways, our very existence forward." He set down his carving tool. "A man who cannot see the value of his own child is blind to the most important things in life." The words washed over Eleanor like a balm. For 3 years, she had lived with the constant grinding awareness of her failure to conceive quickly, enough to produce a son, to please Jackson and his mother. She had internalized their judgment, believing herself somehow deficient, But here was a different perspective, one that valued life for its own sake, that saw Lily not as a disappointment, but as a treasure. "What will you do now?" Key asked, breaking into her thoughts. It was a question Eleanor had been avoiding. What options did a woman alone with an infant have in 1879? Return to her father, who had already shown he had no place for her? Seek work in some town where an unmarried mother would be viewed with suspicion and scorn? "I don't know," she admitted. "I have family back east, but—" She trailed off, the impossibility of the journey in winter hanging unspoken between them. Key nodded, understanding in his eyes. "When the snow melts, we will find a path. Until then, you and the child may stay." The offer was so simply made, so devoid of conditions or expectations, that Eleanor could scarcely believe it. In her experience, nothing was ever freely given. "Why? Would you do that?" she asked, echoing her earlier question. "Take in strangers, risk your safety, share your food?" Key's expression softened slightly. "I told you, all life is connected. Your path crossed mine for a reason." He paused, and something like sorrow passed across his features. "And I know what it is to lose everything in winter." He didn't elaborate, and Eleanor didn't press. The weight of unspoken history hung in the air between them, a shared understanding of loss that transcended their different worlds. "Thank you," she said again, the words still insufficient, but all she had to offer. That night, as Lily slept peacefully and the fire burned low, Eleanor watched as Key performed what appeared to be a blessing ritual, sprinkling something fragrant on the coals, murmuring words in a language she didn't understand, his face solemn in the flickering light. She realized then that she had stumbled from one world into another, from the harsh judgments and rigid expectations of settler society into something older, something that moved according to different rhythms and values. For the first time since Lily's birth, Eleanor felt the knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. They were alive, they were safe, and tomorrow, for the first time in years, would bring possibilities rather than obligations. Outside, the winter wind howled, but within the rounded walls of Key's home, a fragile sense of peace began to take root. As January yielded to February, the world outside remained locked in winter's grip, but within Key's dwelling, life settled into unexpected rhythms. Eleanor's strength returned gradually, each day bringing new capabilities and small victories. The first time she walked across the room without assistance. The first time she could hold Lily for more than a few minutes without her arms trembling from exertion. The first night she slept without waking in cold sweat, heart pounding from dreams of snow and abandonment. The dwelling, a hogan, Key called it, was more ingeniously constructed than Eleanor had first realized. Its circular shape allowed heat to distribute evenly, while the smoke hole at the center of the domed roof provided ventilation without sacrificing warmth. Despite the harsh conditions outside, the interior remained comfortable, even cozy. Key himself was an enigma Eleanor found, herself increasingly drawn to unraveling. He moved through his days with purpose and quiet dignity. He would leave at dawn, checking traps or hunting, and return with rabbits, a grouse, or occasionally venison. He never complained about the extra mouths to feed, never made Eleanor feel her presence was a burden. They developed an unspoken routine. Eleanor would tend the fire and prepare meals while Key was out. When he returned, he would often take Lily while Eleanor worked, cradling the infant with surprising tenderness while he carved or mended equipment. One morning, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Eleanor found herself watching as Key showed Lily a small wooden toy he had carved, a bear with movable legs. The baby couldn't grasp it yet, but her eyes followed its movement, and she cooed in response to Key's low, gentle voice. "You're good with her," Eleanor observed, surprised by the ease with which this solitary man had adapted to an infant's presence. Key glanced up, something unreadable flickering across his face. "Children are sacred gifts," he replied. "They see the world as it truly is, not as we have learned to see it." "Did you have children?" Eleanor asked, then immediately regretted the question. It seemed too personal, too intrusive, but Key didn't appear offended. He was quiet for a long moment, still moving the wooden bear for Lily's entertainment. "A son," he said finally, "many winters ago." The simple answer contained worlds of unspoken loss. Eleanor didn't press further, recognizing the boundaries of their still fragile connection. Instead, she turned the conversation toward practical matters. "I need to contribute more," she said. "You've done so much for us, and I'm stronger now. I can work." Key studied her for a moment, his dark eyes assessing. "You still heal," he said. "Yes, but I'm not an invalid anymore." Eleanor straightened, her shoulders. "I was raised to earn my keep. Please let me do something useful." A ghost of a smile touched Key's lips. "Very well. Tomorrow, I will show you." True to his word, the next morning after breakfast, Key brought Eleanor to the loom that stood against the eastern wall of the hogan. "You know weaving?" he asked. Eleanor shook her head. "I can sew and knit, but I've never used a loom." "It is not so different," Key said. "The pattern has already begun. I will show you how to continue it." For the next hour, he demonstrated the basic techniques: how to pass the shuttle through the warp threads, how to tighten each row with the comb, and how to create patterns by varying the sequence. His hands moved with practiced precision, making the complex process look effortless. Eleanor watched intently, determined to master this new skill. When he handed her the shuttle, her first attempts were clumsy, producing uneven rows that ruined the pattern's clean lines. "I'm sorry," she said, frustration coloring her voice. "I'm making a mess of your work." "No apology needed," Key replied calmly. "All learning begins this way." He gently corrected her hand position. "Like this. Let the thread guide you, not your thoughts." Eleanor tried again, focusing on feeling rather than thinking. The shuttle moved more smoothly this time, the thread falling into place as if finding its natural home. "Better," Key nodded. "You have good hands." The simple praise warmed Eleanor in unexpected ways. When had anyone last acknowledged her capabilities, rather than her shortcomings? Jackson had criticized everything from her cooking to her posture. Agatha had found fault with her housekeeping, her speech, her very existence. But here was a man who simply observed her efforts and offered guidance, without judgment. Over the following days, Eleanor spent hours at the loom, losing herself in the rhythmic work. The blanket taking shape beneath her fingers was a complex pattern of blue, gold, and earth red, with geometric designs that reminded her of mountains and flowing water. "What does the pattern mean?" she asked Key one evening as they sat by the fire, Eleanor nursing Lily while Key mended a leather quiver. "It tells a story," he explained, setting aside his work. "The blue is sky and water, the gold is sunlight. The red is earth. Together they show the way all things are connected, from the highest clouds to the deepest roots." Eleanor traced a triangular pattern with her finger. "And these mountains, they stand between worlds, their roots in the earth, their peaks touching the sky. They remind us to live in balance." The concept resonated with Eleanor in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Her life before had been so compartmentalized, duties and obligations stacked in rigid hierarchy, with little room for connection or meaning beyond survival. "Your people have beautiful ways of seeing the world," she said softly. Key's expression grew more serious. "Many white men do not think so. They see our ways as primitive, our beliefs as superstition." "I'm beginning to think white men are wrong." "About a great many things," Eleanor replied, surprising herself with her candor. A hint of amusement touched Key's eyes. "Perhaps some are learning. As February deepened, Key began teaching Eleanor other skills essential to life in this harsh landscape. He showed her which plants could be harvested even in winter. Pine needles for tea rich in healing properties, inner bark that could be ground into emergency flour, roots that slept beneath the snow but could be found by one who knew where to look. He taught her to read the weather in the sky's colors, in the behavior of animals, in the very feel of the air against her skin. He showed her how to preserve meat by smoking, how to make pemmican that would sustain life through the leanest times. Each lesson was delivered with the same patient demeanor, never condescending, never rushing. Key didn't speak often, but when he did, his words carried weight. One particularly cold afternoon, as they worked together preparing a deer hide, Key scraping while Eleanor rubbed in a mixture of brains and fat to soften the leather, he surprised her with a question of his own. "The man who cast you out," he said, his hands never pausing in their work, "did you love him?" Eleanor's hands still. No one had ever asked her that before. Not her father when arranging the marriage, not the preacher who performed the ceremony, not even Jackson himself. "I thought I might someday," she answered honestly. "He wasn't cruel, not at first, just distant. I hoped that with time, with children—" She trailed off, the familiar ache of disappointment rising in her throat. "But no," she continued after a moment, "I never loved him. I don't think I knew what that meant." Key nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he had already suspected. "And now?" "Now." Eleanor resumed her work, focusing on the repetitive motion of rubbing the hide. "Now I know that what I felt was obligation, not love, and that they're not the same thing at all." They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the scrape of Key's bone tool against leather and Lily's occasional coos from her cradleboard. "Nearby, among my people," Key said eventually, "marriage is not a binding for life if the spirits are not truly joined. A woman unhappy with her husband may place his belongings outside the dwelling. He knows then that she has released him, and he must go." Eleanor found the concept revolutionary. Women can end a marriage just like that. "Not just like that," Key corrected gently. "It is a serious matter, but yes, a woman's happiness is considered essential to the harmony of the family. An unhappy woman makes for unhappy children, an unhappy clan." The idea that a woman's contentment might be central to family welfare rather than incidental was entirely foreign to Eleanor's experience. In the world she came from, a wife's duty was to endure, to accommodate, to bear children and keep house, regardless of her own feelings on the matter. "Your ways seem kinder," she said finally. "Not always," Key admitted. "All peoples have both wisdom and blindness, but in matters of the heart, perhaps we have learned some things your people have forgotten." As he spoke, Eleanor found herself studying his face, the strong line of his jaw, the slight creases at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he almost smiled, the quiet intelligence in his gaze. Something unfamiliar stirred within her, something she quickly suppressed. He was her rescuer, her teacher, her host, nothing more. To imagine otherwise would be foolish beyond measure. That night a storm howled down from the mountains, rattling the Hogan's sturdy frame and driving snow into drifts that nearly covered the entrance by morning. Key had to dig their way out, returning covered in white powder, his breath steaming in the frigid air. "Bad?" Eleanor asked, taking his frost-covered coat to hang by the fire. "Worst of the season," he confirmed. "We stay inside today." Confined to the Hogan's interior, they busied themselves with indoor tasks. Key worked on making arrows, carefully straightening each shaft over the fire before attaching points he had napped from obsidian. Eleanor continued weaving, finding her rhythm improved with each passing day. Lily was fussy, perhaps sensing the storm's energy. When her crying grew persistent, Key set aside his work. "May I?" he asked, holding out his hands. Eleanor handed him the baby, watching as he cradled her against his chest and began to hum, a low, melodic sound that rose and fell like the wind itself. Lily's cries gradually subsided, her tiny body relaxing. "Against him, what is that song?" Eleanor asked when Lily had fallen asleep. "A blessing for children," Key explained, his voice soft to avoid waking the infant. "It asks the spirits to watch over them, to give them strength and wisdom." "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, moved by the tenderness of this man who owed her, and Lily, nothing yet gave them everything. "I sang it to my son," Key said, the admission clearly costing him something. "When he was ill." Eleanor sensed she was being granted a rare glimpse into his closely guarded past. "What happened?" she asked gently. Key was silent for a long moment, his eyes on Lily's sleeping face. "Fever," he said finally. "The white man's disease came to our camp. Many died. My wife. My son." He spoke the words without inflection, yet Eleanor could feel the depth of pain beneath their surface. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, understanding now why he lived alone, why he had been traveling in such a remote country when he found them. Key carefully placed Lily back in her cradle. "It was 7 winters ago," he said. "I left my people, went into the mountains to die." The firelight played across his features, illuminating a vulnerability Eleanor had never seen before. "But the spirits had other plans. They would not take me." "So you made a new life," Eleanor said, seeing his solitary existence in a different light now. Not rejection of his people, but a personal pilgrimage born of grief too great to bear among familiar faces. "I existed," Key corrected, "until I found you and the child in the snow. Now, perhaps, I begin to live again." The candor of his statement caught Eleanor off guard. There was no hidden meaning in his words, no expectation, simply truth, offered as naturally as he offered food or shelter. Before she could respond, a particularly violent gust of wind shook the hogan, sending a shower of snow down through the smoke hole. Eleanor jumped up to adjust the covering, while Key moved to check that no snow was coming in around the door. The moment passed, but its impact lingered. As they worked together to secure their shelter against the storm, Eleanor was struck by how completely her world had transformed in just a few short weeks. She had lost everything: husband, home, security. Yet, somehow felt richer now than she ever had before. Here in this simple dwelling, with this quiet man who spoke truth and valued life in all its forms, she had found something she hadn't even known to seek: respect, purpose, and the first tentative shoots of what might, with time and care, grow into happiness. That night, as the storm gradually subsided and moonlight filtered through the smoke hole, Eleanor lay awake, listening to Key's steady breathing from his sleeping place across the fire. Lily slumbered peacefully beside her, one tiny hand curled around Eleanor's finger. In the morning they would face whatever new challenges the winter brought. But for now, in this moment of quiet between breaths, Eleanor allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she had been avoiding. She did not want to leave when spring came. She did not want this unexpected sanctuary to end. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it settled over her heart like the soft furs that kept the cold at bay, a protection against the harsh realities that waited beyond these walls, a promise that perhaps her story and Lily's were not yet fully written. Outside, the wind whispered secrets to the stars, and the snow continued its slow, patient work of transformation. March arrived with subtle shifts in the world around them. The daylight stretched longer, the sun's rays gaining strength even as nights remained bitterly cold. Inside the hogan, another kind of thawing continued, the careful dissolution of boundaries between two people from vastly different worlds. Eleanor had mastered the basics of weaving now, her hands moving with growing confidence across the loom. The blanket she worked on had progressed significantly, its pattern telling a story she was only beginning to understand. Sometimes, when Key thought she wasn't looking, she would catch him watching her work, a quiet approval in his gaze that meant more to her than any praise she'd received before. Lily was thriving, growing plumper by the day, her eyes tracking movement with increasing awareness. She had begun to smile, real smiles, not the reflexive ones of newborns, and the first time it happened, directed at Key as he showed her a feather he'd found, Eleanor had felt her heart constrict with emotions too complex to name. One morning, in mid-March, Eleanor woke to find the hogan empty except for Lily, still sleeping peacefully. Outside, she discovered Key kneeling in a patch of earth he had cleared of snow, his hands working methodically to turn the soil. "What are you doing?" she asked, wrapping her shawl tighter against the morning chill. "Preparing," he replied, sitting, back on his heels. "The growing season is coming soon. The earth must be ready." Eleanor surveyed the small plot. "You garden?" "All life depends on what grows from the earth," Key said. "To tend it is to honor that connection." He showed her the seeds he had stored through winter, corn, squash, beans, each wrapped carefully in deerskin pouches. Eleanor had never considered that a man living alone in the wilderness would cultivate crops. In her experience, farming was women's work, while men hunted or managed livestock. "I'd like to help," she offered. "I used to keep a kitchen garden before." She trailed off, not wanting to invite memories of her old life into this new day. Key nodded. "Good. We will work together. The child, too, when she's older. She should know where food comes from, how to call it forth from the soil." The casual mention of Lily being older here, of a future that stretched beyond their temporary arrangement, caused a flutter in Eleanor's chest. Did he envision them staying? Was that even possible? Before she could dwell on these questions, Key stood and brushed dirt from his hands. "Today we go to the creek," he announced. "Fresh fish will be good after so much dried meat." They bundled Lily warmly and secured her to a cradle board that Key had crafted specially for her. The contraption fascinated Eleanor, ingeniously designed to keep the baby secure while allowing her to observe the world around her. "She sees everything this way," Key explained as they walked through the melting snow. "Learn the land even before she can walk upon it." The creek was a 20-minute journey from the hogan, winding through a small valley sheltered by pine trees. Ice still lined its edges, but the center flowed freely, clear water gurgling over smooth stones. Key showed Eleanor how to fashion a simple fishing spear from a slender branch. Its end split and spread to form prongs that would hold a fish once struck. "Watch the shadows," he instructed, demonstrating how to account for the water's refraction when aiming. "The fish is not always where it appears to be." Eleanor's first attempts were comical failures, her spear plunging into empty water as the quick trout darted away. But Key's patience never wavered, and by midday she had managed to catch 2 decent-sized fish. "I did it," she exclaimed, holding up her prize, water dripping down her arms. The corner of Key's mouth lifted in what was for him a broad smile. "Good hands," he said, echoing his earlier praise of her weaving. "Quick to learn." Pride warmed Eleanor more effectively than the early spring sun. She had spent so many years failing to please Jackson, failing to give him a son, failing to earn Agatha's approval. Now, this simple success felt monumental. They sat by the creek bank to clean the fish, working side by side in companionable silence. Lily, secured to her cradle board propped against a tree, watched cloud shadows dance across the water's surface, her eyes wide with infant wonder. "She will know freedom," Key remarked, following Eleanor's gaze to her daughter. "Not like the children in the white settlements, kept inside walls, always told what they cannot do." Eleanor considered this. "Is that how you see our ways? As restrictions?" Key's hands continued their practice movements, gutting the fish with precise efficiency. "I see people who build fences," he said finally, "around land, around animals, around themselves, always dividing, claiming, 'This is mine, that is yours,' as if the earth could be owned." The observation struck Eleanor as profoundly true. Everything in settler society revolved around possession: who owned what land, what livestock, what rights to water or timber. Even marriage was fundamentally a transfer of ownership, a woman passing from father to husband like a deed to property. "Not all of us believe that," she said, though even as the words left her mouth she questioned their truth. Hadn't she herself measured worth by ownership her entire life? "No," Key agreed, surprising her. "Some of your people learn to see differently, but it is hard to unlearn what is taught from birth." Eleanor fell silent, contemplating the fish in her hands, the creek flowing endlessly before her, the vast sky above. Who truly owned any of it? The very notion seemed suddenly absurd. That evening, as they ate the fish roasted over the fire, Eleanor found herself studying Key with new awareness. He was perhaps in his late 30s, though it was difficult to tell, his face weathered by elements but unlined by worry, his movements those of a man in his prime. The firelight played across his features, highlighting cheekbones and the strong column of his throat as he swallowed. He caught her watching and held her gaze steadily, without embarrassment or pretense. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Something was shifting between them, had been shifting for weeks, a recognition neither had put into words. "Thank you," she said simply, "for teaching me." Key inclined his head slightly. "You are willing to learn. Many are not." "What happens when the snow melts completely?" she asked, the question that had been haunting her finally finding voice. "When will the passes clear?" Key set aside his wooden plate. "What do you wish would happen?" The directness of his response caught Eleanor off guard. In her world, people spoke in circles around difficult truths, cloaking intentions in polite fictions. Key's straightforward question demanded equal honesty. "I don't want to go back," she admitted. "Not to my husband's family, not to my father. But I don't know what other choice I have. A woman alone with a child." "You are not alone," Key said quietly. The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with implications neither was ready to fully examine. "What would it mean?" Eleanor asked carefully. "If we stayed?" Key took his time answering, as was his way with important matters. "It would mean learning a different path," he said. "Finally, not easy, the white settlements would talk. My people would question, two worlds neither fully accepting. Your people, would they reject us?" "Not reject," Key clarified. "Question, wonder. Some would welcome, some would watch and wait. We are not one mind any more than white people." Eleanor nodded, appreciating his refusal to oversimplify. "And you? What would it mean to you if we stayed?" For the first time since she'd known him, Key seemed momentarily at a loss for words. He stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful. "When I found you in the snow," he began slowly, "I thought the spirits had sent me to guide you to the next world, to ease your passing." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "But then you lived, the child lived. And I began to think perhaps the spirits had other intentions." He reached for a stick and stirred the fire, sending sparks spiraling toward the smoke hole. "My home has been quiet for many years. Too quiet. If you stayed, there would be voices again. Laughter, perhaps. Life is returning." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a direct invitation. But in its measured honesty, it moved Eleanor more profoundly than any passionate plea could have. "I'd like that," she whispered, "for Lily to grow up hearing laughter." Something eased in Key's posture, a tension released. He nodded once, decisively, as if the matter were settled. In a way, perhaps it was. They didn't speak further of it that night. But a new certainty had entered their shared space. A future glimpsed, not yet claimed but acknowledged as possible. The following week brought the first true break in winter's hold. A warm wind blew down from the western slopes, melting snow in earnest and revealing patches of earth that had been hidden for months. The creek swelled with runoff, and birds returned in flocks, their calls filling the dawn with raucous joy. Key spent these days preparing for spring in earnest, repairing tools, checking his horse's tack, clearing the path to the garden plot. Eleanor continued her weaving and began experiments with the dyes Key showed her, beautiful colors extracted from roots, berries, and minerals. One afternoon, Key returned from checking his traps with news. "Riders on the North Trail," he reported. "White men, perhaps traders, are heading for the settlement." Eleanor felt a stab of anxiety. The outside world, which had receded to a distant memory during their isolated winter, suddenly seemed threateningly close. "Do you think they'll come this way?" she asked, instinctively moving to where Lily napped. Key shook his head. "Not likely, but soon the trails will be busy again. We should prepare." "Prepare how? If you are to stay," he said, "we must establish your story for those who will ask questions." Eleanor hadn't considered this, the inevitable curiosity her presence would provoke, both from settlers and from Key's own people. "What kind of story?" she asked. "A true one," Key replied, "but perhaps not complete. You were abandoned. I found you. The rest," he made a dismissive gesture, "is not for others to know." Eleanor nodded slowly. "And Lily, what will people think about her?" "That she is a child," Key said simply. "That she belongs where she is loved." The uncomplicated wisdom of his answer brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. In her former world, Lily would forever be defined by her birth circumstances, the unwanted daughter, the child whose arrival triggered abandonment. Here, with Key, she could simply be herself. "There is something else," Key said, his tone shifting to one of greater seriousness. "You should see it now before others come." Intrigued, Eleanor bundled Lily and followed him outside. They walked beyond the garden plot, over a small rise, to an area she hadn't explored before. There, in a clearing surrounded by juniper trees, stood a second hogan, smaller than the one they lived in, its entrance facing east like their own, but clearly long unused. "Another home?" Eleanor asked, confused. "Not for living," Key explained, leading her closer, "for memories." Inside, the hogan was empty of furnishings, but not of meaning. Small items lined the walls. A child's moccasin, a woman's hair ornament, a bow too small for a man's hands. In the center, where a fire would normally burn, lay a circular arrangement of stones, each one painted with symbols Eleanor couldn't decipher. "My wife," Key said softly. "My son. Their spirits rest here." Eleanor stood very still, understanding the profound trust he was extending by bringing her to this sacred place. "In your world," Key continued, "the dead are put in the ground and left behind. In mine, they remain part of the family circle. Their wisdom, their presence, still guides." Eleanor thought of the cemetery back in Ohio, where her mother was buried, the stark headstone, the sense of irrevocable separation she'd felt standing before it as a child. "This is beautiful," she said sincerely. Key knelt and touched one of the stones gently. "If you and the child stay, you should know this place, should know them." He looked up at her. "My son was called Tsinta. It means among the trees. My wife was a Higa. She fights." The sharing of these names clearly held deep significance. Eleanor knelt beside him, Lily cradled in her arms. "Thank you for telling me about them." "If they were here," Key said, his voice steady but soft, "I believe they would welcome you. Ahiga would teach you many things I cannot. Tsinta would help with the baby and would make her laugh." Eleanor felt the weight of absence in the small hogan. Not a morbid heaviness, but a presence of love that had nowhere to go. On impulse, she reached out and touched Key's hand where it rested on the stone. "I'm sorry they're not here," she said, "but I'm grateful you are, that you found us when you did." Key turned his hand beneath hers, their palms meeting. It was the first time. They had touched intentionally, beyond the practical assistance of daily tasks. His skin was warm and calloused, strong but gentle as it closed around her fingers. They remained like that for a moment, connected in the quiet presence of those who had gone before, while Lily, symbol of continuance, of life persisting despite all odds, watched with wide, curious eyes. Later, as they walked back to their hogan, and Eleanor was beginning to think of it as theirs, not just his, Key paused at the crest of the small hill. The valley spread before them, patches of snow melting to reveal the first tentative green of new growth. "Spring comes," he said, a simple observation that carried layers of meaning. The world was awakening, changing. Soon they would need to navigate that change, to face whatever challenges their unusual arrangement would bring. But for now, in this moment between seasons, they stood together on common ground, no longer strangers, not quite family, but something equally profound. Two souls who had found each other across impossible divides, creating a sanctuary neither had expected to discover. Eleanor shifted Lily to her other arm and took a deep breath of the warming air. For the first time since she could remember, she felt not just alive, but awake, present to the possibilities unfurling before her, like the first brave shoots pushing through winter soil. "Yes," she agreed, looking not at the valley, but at the man beside her. Spring comes. April arrived with a rush of change. The last stubborn patches of snow retreated to shadowed places beneath trees, and the valley transformed daily, grasses emerging, wildflowers dotting the hillsides, trees budding with tender green. The world seemed to exhale after winter's long-held breath, stretching toward warmth and light. For Eleanor, the changing season brought a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The decision to stay with Key had been made in the heart before the mind fully grasped its implications. Now, as the outside world became increasingly accessible, those implications demanded consideration. One morning, as they worked side by side planting corn seeds in the freshly prepared garden, Eleanor voiced the concern that had been growing. Alongside the spring shoots, "People will come soon," she said, pressing a seed into the dark soil. "The trading post will open. Travelers will pass through." Key nodded, his movement steady and methodical. "Yes, the world awakens. They'll see. Me here, a white woman living with—" She faltered, unsure how to describe what they were to each other. "With a Navajo man," Key finished simply. "Yes, they will talk." "Does that worry you?" Key considered this, potting soil over another seed before answering. "Talk is like wind. It blows hard, then passes. What matters is what remains standing." Afterward, Eleanor wished she could share his philosophical view. In her experience, talk, gossip, could destroy lives as surely as any storm. Women especially lived and died by their reputations. "Where I come from," she said, "a woman found. Living with a man, not her husband, would be ruined. Her child would be—" She couldn't finish the thought. The image of Lily facing scorn and rejection too painful to articulate. Key sat back on his heels, studying her face. "You fear for the child?" "Of course I do." Eleanor's hands stilled in the soil. "I don't care what they say about me. But Lily deserves better than to be branded illegitimate twice over." "These are white ways of thinking," Key observed, not unkindly. "Labels, categories. The child simply is. Her worth does not depend on others' words." "But her future might," Eleanor countered. "The world isn't as wise as you, Key," he acknowledged. This with a slight inclination of his head. "Then we must be wise enough for both worlds. Later that day, while Lily napped, Eleanor found herself at the loom, hands working automatically while her mind churned with worry. The blanket had progressed significantly, the pattern of mountains, sky, and flowing water now clearly visible, telling its story of interconnection. Key entered quietly, carrying a small wooden box Eleanor had never seen before. He set it down beside her and opened it, revealing an assortment of small treasures, colorful beads, polished stones, pieces of worked silver. "For the blanket," he explained. "The finishing touches." Eleanor ran her fingers over the items, admiring their craftsmanship. "They're beautiful. Where did they come from?" "Some I made, some I traded for, some belong to—" He paused briefly. "To family." Eleanor understood he meant his wife and son. The sharing of these precious mementos represented another layer of trust, another step toward a future neither had fully articulated. "I can't take these," she protested gently. "They're too valuable." "A gift freely given has the highest value," Key replied. "Choose what speaks to you. The blanket tells your story now." Eleanor selected a few pieces, a small turquoise bead, a silver button stamped with a star pattern, a shell disc that must have traveled far from some distant ocean. As she began to incorporate them into the weaving, Key watched with that quiet attentiveness that had become so familiar, so comforting. "When I was a girl," Eleanor said, working a silver bead into the pattern, "my mother taught me to sew. Not weaving like this, but simple stitches for mending and making clothes." She smiled at the memory. "She said a woman's hands should always be busy, creating beauty from necessity." "A wise woman," Key commented. "Among my people, beauty and purpose are not separated. What is useful should also please the eye, honor the spirit." "I think my mother would have liked that idea." Eleanor hadn't spoken of her mother in years. The pain of her loss at 14 had been too acute, the subsequent hardships too consuming. "She died when I was young. Fever. Like my wife," Key noted, the shared experience bridging their different worlds. "Yes." Eleanor worked another bead into place. "After she died, my father changed, grew harder. I think he loved her very much, but couldn't speak of it. Instead, he became silent, distant. Grief takes many forms," Key said. "Some bury it deep, like a seed that never sprouts." "Is that what you did?" Eleanor asked, glancing up from her work. "When did you lose your family?" Key's expression remained calm, but something flickered in his eyes. An old pain, carefully managed. "For a time. I went to the high country, lived alone, spoke to no one, hunted only when hunger demanded it. What changed?" "The mountains," he said simply. "They do not grieve, they stand. Storms come, snow falls, lightning strikes. Still they stand. I watched them and learned." Eleanor tried to imagine Key in those first raw days of loss, this steady, self-contained man hollowed out by grief, seeking solitude in the high peaks. Had he been angry? Had he wept? She couldn't picture it, yet the depth of his resilience spoke of profound suffering overcome. "And then you found us," she said softly. "The wheel turns," Key replied. An expression she had come to understand meant the natural cycle of life continuing, bringing old endings and new beginnings. "The spirits have their own wisdom." Their conversation was interrupted by Lily's awakening cries. Eleanor set aside her weaving and went to the cradle, lifting her daughter, who was now plump-cheeked and alert at nearly 4 months old. "She grows stronger each day," Key observed, watching as Eleanor settled back at the loom with Lily in her lap. "Yes, thanks to you." Eleanor bounced Lily gently. "I don't know if she would have survived that night if you hadn't found us." "If," Key said with the hint of a smile, "is a path that was not walked. We are here. That is what matters." The following morning brought an unexpected change to their routine. Key announced he needed to ride to the foothills to check on wild honey groves he had discovered the previous year. "Will you be gone long?" Eleanor asked, trying to keep the note of anxiety from her voice. She had not been apart from Key since the day he found her in the snow. "Until tomorrow," he replied. "The journey is too far for one day." He prepared methodically, packing dried meat, extra blankets, his hunting knife and bow. As he saddled his horse outside the hogan, Eleanor stood watching, Lily bundled against the spring morning's chill. "You have everything you need?" Key asked, adjusting the saddle straps. "Enough firewood? Water?" "We'll be fine," Eleanor assured him, touched by his concern. "We've learned from a good teacher, haven't we, Lily?" The baby gurgled in response, reaching toward Key with a chubby hand. He approached and allowed her tiny fingers to grasp his expression softening in that way it only did for Lily. "Be good for your mother, little one," he said. "I will bring honey for you to taste." Then he turned to Eleanor, and for a moment she thought he might embrace her. Instead, he reached into his pouch and handed her something small and polished, a smooth stone pendant on a leather cord. "Wear this," he said. "Protection." Eleanor accepted it, feeling the stone's warmth against her palm. "Thank you." Key mounted his horse with fluid grace, looking down at the woman and child who had so unexpectedly become part of his life. "I will return before the second sunset." Eleanor nodded, already counting the hours until then. "We'll be waiting." She watched until he disappeared over the ridge, the morning sun casting his silhouette against the awakening landscape. Only when he was completely out of sight did she turn back to the hogan, the pendant clasped tightly in her hand. The day passed, slowly. Eleanor busied herself with tasks, tending the garden, preparing meals, weaving when Lily napped. She spoke aloud to the baby more than usual, the sound of her own voice a comfort against the unusual quiet of the hogan. As evening approached, she built up the fire and placed Key's pendant around her neck, its weight unfamiliar but reassuring. Against her skin, the hogan seemed larger without his presence, each shadow deeper, each sound from outside more noticeable. Eleanor had just settled Lily for the night when she heard it, the unmistakable approach of horses, more than one, coming from the direction of the North Trail. Her heart quickened. Key had gone west and wasn't expected back until tomorrow. These were strangers. She quickly checked that Lily was secure, then moved to the doorway, listening. Male voices carried on the evening air, speaking English. White men, then. Traders, perhaps, or travelers who had spotted the smoke from the hogans. Fire. Eleanor hesitated, torn between caution and the ingrained hospitality of frontier life. In the end, the decision was made for her. A voice called out, "Hello, the house! Anyone home?" Taking a deep breath, Eleanor stepped outside, squinting in the fading light to make out the visitors. Two men on horseback, both bearded and trail-worn, had stopped at a respectful distance from the hogan. Their expressions registered surprise at the sight of her, a white woman emerging from a Navajo dwelling. "Evening, ma'am," the older of the two said, removing his hat. "Didn't expect to find one of our own out here. You all right?" The question carried implications that immediately set Eleanor on edge. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The men exchanged glances. "We're heading to Fort Defiance," the younger one explained. "Got turned around after crossing the creek. Saw your smoke and thought we might ask directions." "I'm afraid I can't help you with that," Eleanor said. "I'm relatively new to this area myself." "The Indian who lives here," the older man said. Scanning the clearing, "He around?" Eleanor's fingers found Key's pendant, drawing strength from its solid presence. "He's away hunting. I'm expecting back tomorrow." Another meaningful look passed between the men. The older one cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you're in any kind of situation, we'd be happy to escort you to the fort." There's a missionary station there, people who could help a woman in your circumstances. The implication was clear, and Eleanor felt a flash of indignation. "That's very kind," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "But as I said, I'm perfectly fine. My daughter and I are well cared for." "Daughter?" The younger man peered toward the Hogan as if trying to see inside. "There's a child here too." "Yes," Eleanor said firmly. "My daughter Lily. She's sleeping now." The older man shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Ma'am, forgive my bluntness, but are you here of your own free will? There've been stories—" "I understand your concern," Eleanor interrupted, her patience waning, "but I assure you I am here by choice. The man you're referring to saved my life and my child's when we were abandoned in the winter snow. He has shown nothing but kindness and respect." This silenced them momentarily. Then the older man sighed, replacing his hat. "Well, if you're certain—" He didn't sound convinced. "Very certain," Eleanor replied. "Now I can offer you water for yourselves and your horses before you continue your journey, but I must ask that you keep your voices down so as not to wake my daughter." The offer of water, the most basic hospitality of the desert, seemed to ease the tension slightly. The men dismounted and allowed Eleanor to lead their horses to the small stream that ran near the Hogan. As they drank from the cups she provided, their curiosity got the better of their manners. "Been here long?" the younger one asked. "Since January," Eleanor answered, keeping her responses brief. "And your husband? Does he know where you are?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. "My husband abandoned me and our newborn daughter in a blizzard. He is no longer of any concern to me." This blunt statement clearly startled the men. Abandonment was a serious matter in frontier communities where survival often depended on mutual support. "That's a hard thing," the older man acknowledged. "Man who'd do that deserves whatever's coming to him." The younger one still seemed troubled. "But living with a—" He caught himself. "I mean, surely there were other options." "Were there?" Eleanor challenged, her voice low but intense. "Should I have let my baby freeze to death while waiting for the proper Christian charity that never came? The only person who stopped to help us was Ki Yazi. The only home offered was his. I made my choice, and I stand by it." Her fervor seemed to impress, even as it discomfited them. They finished their water in awkward silence, then prepared to remount. "Fort's about 2 days' ride northwest," the older man offered. "Just so you know, if you ever need it." Eleanor nodded, accepting the information without comment. As they prepared to leave, the younger man hesitated. "Ma'am, folks will talk when they hear about this. Not everyone's understanding." "I'm aware," Eleanor replied, "but thank you for your concern." After they departed, Eleanor returned to the Hogan, checking on Lily, who had slept through the entire encounter. She added wood to the fire and sat beside it, her mind churning. The men's reactions confirmed her fears. The outside world would not easily accept the life she had chosen. Their well-meaning concern carried the seeds of potential trouble. What if they told others? What if officials from the fort decided to rescue her, regardless of her wishes? Eleanor touched the pendant at her throat, drawing comfort from its connection to Ki. She had spoken truthfully to the travelers. She was here by choice, a choice she would defend. But the encounter had made abstract worries concrete. The worlds she and Ki belonged to would not simply allow them to exist in peace. There would be judgments, interference, perhaps even danger. When Ki returned the following afternoon, she told him immediately about the visitors. He listened without interruption, his expression giving nothing away. "Were you frightened?" he asked when she finished. "Not of them," Eleanor clarified. "They weren't threatening, but I am concerned about what happens next, who they might tell." Ki nodded thoughtfully. "It begins," he said, "the outside pushing in." "What do we do?" "We live," he replied simply. "We continue. Words cannot harm what is true." His certainty calmed her somewhat, but practical worries remained. What if someone tries to take Lily away? Claims I'm unfit because of us? For the first time, Eleanor saw a flash of genuine anger cross Key's features, a hardening of his eyes, a tightening of his jaw that transformed his usual serenity into something formidable. "No one," he said with quiet intensity, "will take the child." The declaration held the weight of a vow. Eleanor believed him completely. Whatever challenges came, Key would defend them as fiercely as he had saved them on that winter night. Not with violence, perhaps, but with the same unwavering determination. That evening, after Lily was asleep, they sat outside the hogan, watching. Stars emerge in the deepening blue of the desert sky. The air was cool, but no longer bitter, scented with sage and pinyon pine. "I finished the blanket today," Eleanor said, breaking a comfortable silence. "While you were gone?" Key looked at her with interest. "Is it ready?" She nodded. "I'd like to show you, if you don't mind bringing Lily out so we don't wake her." While Key carefully lifted the sleeping baby, Eleanor went inside and returned with the completed blanket, now removed from the loom. She spread it on the ground between them, its colors rich in the last light of day. The pattern she had begun under Key's guidance had evolved, incorporating elements of both their worlds. Mountains and flowing water remained central, but Eleanor had added her own symbols, a small cabin representing her past, stars forming the constellation Ursa Major that her mother had taught her to recognize. Tiny flowers along the border for Lily, the beads and silver pieces Key had given her were worked into the design, catching the fading light. "It tells our story," she explained softly. "Where we came from, how our paths crossed, what we've built together." Key studied the blanket intently, his free hand hovering over certain elements as if reading them with his fingers. "You have learned well," he said finally. "Not just the technique, the meaning." Eleanor felt a wave of relief. She had worried he might find her additions inappropriate, her interpretation of the traditional art presumptuous. Instead, he seemed genuinely moved. "There is one element missing," he said, reaching into his pouch. He withdrew a small object and placed it in her palm. A carved wooden medallion, its surface etched with an intricate design of concentric circles. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, admiring the craftsmanship. "A Hogan blessing," Key explained. "It represents harmony between all things, earth and sky, man and woman, past and future." He nodded toward the blanket. "It belongs at the center." Eleanor accepted the gift with a trembling hand, understanding its significance. This wasn't merely a decorative element, but a sacred symbol, an acknowledgement that what they were creating together deserved blessing and protection. As she carefully secured it to the center of the blanket, where all the design elements converged, Eleanor felt something shift within her, the last lingering doubt about her decision to stay, to build a life here, dissolving like mist under the morning sun. The traveler's visit had reminded her that challenges lay ahead, that the outside world would not easily accept their unconventional family. But here, in this moment, with Lily sleeping peacefully and Key beside her with the blanket telling their shared story spread between them, Eleanor knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. "Tomorrow," Key said, looking toward the eastern horizon where the new day would dawn, "we will hang it in the place of honor, where all who enter will see it and know this is a home built on harmony." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. A home. After so much loss, so much uncertainty, they had created something precious together, not just shelter from the elements, but a true sanctuary for their hearts. Above them, the stars continued their ancient dance across the vast desert sky, bearing witness to this fragile, courageous beginning. May brought vibrant life to the valley. The garden flourished under Eleanor and Key's careful tending, corn stalks reaching skyward, bean vines climbing their supports, squash spreading wide leaves to capture the sun. Wildflowers carpeted the hillsides in purple, yellow, and white, while birds build nests in every available cranny, filling the dawn with song. Lily thrived alongside the blooming landscape. Now 5 months old, she had begun to roll over, to grasp objects with increasing dexterity, to laugh, a sound so pure and joyful it never failed to lighten Eleanor's heart. She especially loved when Key played with her, making shadows dance on the wall of the hogan, showing her feathers and stones and little carved animals, speaking to her in both English and Navajo. "She understands," he said one evening as Lily babbled back at him, clearly attempting to mimic his sounds. "She will speak both languages, walk in both worlds." Eleanor watched them from the cooking fire, where she was preparing a stew of rabbit and early spring vegetables. Is that possible? To truly belong to two worlds? Key considered this, his expression thoughtful as Lily gripped his finger. "Difficult," he acknowledged, "but necessary. She is the bridge." The idea of Lily as a bridge between cultures appealed to Eleanor. Perhaps her daughter would find harmony where others had found only conflict, understanding where others saw only differences. Their encounter with the travelers had put Eleanor on alert, but as days passed without further visitors, she began to relax again. The blanket she had woven now hung on the eastern wall of the hogan, its vibrant colors and meaningful symbols a daily reminder of the life they were creating together. The wooden medallion at its center, Key's blessing, caught the morning light, seeming to glow with inner warmth. Their relationship had continued to evolve, deepening in small, significant ways. They still maintained separate sleeping areas on either side of the central fire, but their days were spent in such close harmony that words often became unnecessary. A glance, a gesture, the slightest change in expression, conveying meaning. Between them, Eleanor had begun to learn Navajo words and phrases, while Key's English, already functional from years of trading, grew more fluent through daily practice. Their conversations ranged widely, from practical matters of survival to philosophical discussions about the differences in their cultures, from memories of their separate pasts to cautious hopes for a shared future. Physical touch between them remained minimal but meaningful, a hand helping the other over rough terrain, fingers brushing while passing a tool, shoulders touching as they sat side by side, watching the sunset. Eleanor found herself increasingly aware of these moments, each one sending a quiet current of awareness through her body. She knew Key felt it too, caught the lingering of his gaze sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, noticed how he would position himself to be near her without crowding, observed the careful respect with which he maintained boundaries neither was quite ready to cross. They were building something precious, something that required patience and trust. Eleanor understood intuitively that rushing would only damage its delicate structure. One morning in late May, Key announced he needed to make a journey to a nearby Navajo encampment. "My mother's clan," he explained. "They have summer grazing. Land's a half-day's ride from here. I should pay respects, let them know I'm well." Eleanor felt a flutter of anxiety. "Will you tell them about us?" "Yes," Key said simply. "They should know. And they may have news, information about the world beyond our valley." Though concerned about how Key's people might react to his unusual household, Eleanor recognized the importance of maintaining these connections. "When will you go?" "Tomorrow, if the weather holds. I will return by nightfall." Should Lily and I come with you?" Eleanor asked hesitantly. Key considered this, his expression unreadable. "Not this time," he said finally. "First, I must prepare them, explain. Some of the elders are," he searched for the right word, "traditional. Change comes slowly for them. Eleanor nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Though she hadn't expected immediate acceptance, the reminder of how others, even Key's own people, might view their arrangement stung nonetheless. "I understand," she said. "We'll be fine here for a day." Key studied her face, seeming to read the emotions she tried to conceal. "Soon," he promised, "you will meet them, when the time is right." The following morning dawned clear and mild, perfect for traveling. Key prepared with his usual thoroughness, packing small gifts for his relatives, tobacco, beads Eleanor had strung during winter evenings, and a carved toy for his cousin's child. Before mounting his horse, he knelt beside Lily, who sat propped against a folded blanket, playing with a string of wooden beads. "Be good, little hawk," he said, using the nickname he had given her when she first began to focus her gaze intently on the world around her. "Watch over your mother." Then he rose and turned to Eleanor. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, a wealth of unspoken feelings passing between them. Then, with gentle deliberation, Key reached out and took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that bridged their different worlds, part traditional Navajo respect, part European courtesy. "I will return before the stars are fully bright," he said. Eleanor nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "We'll be waiting." She watched him ride away, Lily babbling beside her, until horse and rider disappeared over the eastern ridge. Then she turned to the day's tasks, determined to keep busy during his absence. By mid-morning, Eleanor had fed and bathed Lily, tended the garden, and begun preparing a batch of corn flatbread, a skill Key had taught her using an ancient grinding stone and a clay cooking surface. The rhythmic work of grinding the corn into meal soothed her, and she hummed as she worked, pausing occasionally to check on Lily, who dozed on a blanket in the shade. The sound of approaching horses broke her concentration. Instantly alert, Eleanor set down the grinding stone and moved to Lily, gathering the sleeping child into her arms before cautiously approaching the Hogan's entrance. 3 riders appeared over the northern ridge, the direction of the white settlements. Eleanor's heart sank as she recognized the older of the 2 travelers who had visited weeks earlier. With him rode another man she didn't know, and, to her shock, a woman in a dark dress and bonnet. They spotted her and altered course toward the Hogan. Eleanor stepped fully outside, squaring her shoulders and lifting her chin. Whatever their purpose, she would meet it with dignity. "Mrs. Miller," the familiar traveler called as they neared. "Good to see you again, ma'am." Eleanor nodded stiffly. "Mr. Dawson," he supplied. "Samuel Dawson. This here's Reverend Clark from the mission at Fort Defiance, and Mrs. Clark." The Reverend, a tall, thin man with a somber expression, touched the brim of his hat. "Mrs. Miller, we've come on a matter of some concern." "I'm perfectly well, as you can see," Eleanor replied, her arms tightening protectively around Lily, who had awakened and was looking at the strangers with wide, curious eyes. Mrs. Clark, a square-faced woman with tight grey curls visible beneath her bonnet, dismounted with surprising agility for someone of her apparent age. "We're concerned for your spiritual welfare, dear, not just your physical condition." The condescension in her tone set Eleanor's teeth on edge, but she maintained a polite expression. "That's very kind, but unnecessary. Please don't trouble yourselves. On my account." "It's no trouble," Reverend Clark said, also dismounting. "When Brother Dawson informed us of your situation, we felt it our Christian duty to offer assistance." Eleanor resisted the urge to step backward as they approached. "As I told Mr. Dawson previously, I require no assistance. My daughter and I are well cared for." Mrs. Clark's gaze sharpened as she examined Lily. "Such a beautiful child," she said, her tone softening slightly. "May I?" She reached toward Lily, clearly intending to take her. Eleanor stepped back. "I'm sorry, but she's just woken and is easily frightened by strangers." The older woman's mouth tightened. I've raised 5 children of my own and helped bring dozens more into the world, Mrs. Miller. I know a thing or two about babies." "I don't doubt it," Eleanor replied, "but Lily stays with me." An uncomfortable silence followed, broken by Reverend Clark clearing his throat. "Mrs. Miller, perhaps we could speak inside? The sun is quite warm." Eleanor hesitated. Inviting them into Key's home felt like a violation, yet refusing would only increase their suspicion. "Very well," she conceded, "but I must ask you to respect that this is a private home." She led them inside, acutely aware of their scrutiny as they took in the Hogan's interior, the central fire pit, the woven mats on the floor, the handcrafted furniture, the blanket with its blessing medallion prominently displayed. Mrs. Clark made a small sound of disapproval. "You're living like a—" she caught herself, "in quite primitive conditions." "We find it comfortable," Eleanor replied, settling on a mat with Lily in her lap. "Please sit if you wish." The visitors remained standing, exchanging glances that spoke volumes about their assessment of the situation. "Mrs. Miller, Reverend," Clark began, adopting what Eleanor assumed was his pulpit tone. "I understand you suffered a terrible ordeal this winter. Being abandoned by your husband was a grievous sin on his part, one for which he will answer to God." Eleanor nodded, but said nothing, waiting for him to reach his point. "However," he continued, "your response to this trial has placed you in spiritual peril. Living unchaperoned with a man not your husband, and a heathen at that, is contrary to all Christian principles. Mr. Yazzie saved my life and my child's when no one else would," Eleanor said evenly. There was nothing heathen about his compassion. "No one is questioning the initial rescue," Mrs. Clark interjected. "It's the continued arrangement that concerns us." "What exactly are you suggesting?" Eleanor asked, though she knew perfectly. Well, what they meant. Reverend Clark straightened his already rigid posture. "We've come to offer you proper accommodation at the mission. We have a small but comfortable room where you and the child could stay while we locate your family back east. Mrs. Clark would help care for the baby, and you could assist with teaching the native children their letters. A worthy Christian endeavor." The offer was presented as a generous solution to her supposed predicament, but Eleanor heard the underlying judgment and control. They viewed her as fallen, in need of redemption and supervision. "That's very kind," she said carefully, "but as I've explained, I have no wish to leave. This is my home now." Mrs. Clark made a sound of exasperation. "You cannot possibly mean to stay here permanently. Think of your child, if not yourself. What kind of life can she have, raised in such circumstances?" "A life of love and respect," Eleanor replied, her patience wearing thin. "A life where she's valued for herself, not for her gender or what advantage she might bring, but her education, her moral upbringing," Reverend Clark began. "Will be attended to," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "Mr. Yazzie is more educated than you might assume, and my own schooling was thorough. As for morality, I believe compassion, honesty, and courage are values any child would benefit from learning." Regardless of the teacher's background, the visitors exchanged another look, this one more troubled. Dawson, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Miller, but there's talk in the settlement, the kind of talk that could cause trouble. For both of you." A chill ran through Eleanor. "What kind of talk?" "There's those who think a white woman living with an Indian must be there against her will," Dawson explained uncomfortably. "Others who say, well, things I won't repeat in front of a lady. Point is, sooner or later, someone might decide to do something about it." "Are you threatening us, Mr. Dawson?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "No, ma'am, just warning you. I got no quarrel with Yazzie. Seems a decent sort from what little I saw, but not everyone's so reasonable." "What Mr. Dawson is trying to say," Reverend Clark interjected, "is that for your own safety and reputation, you should reconsider our offer. Eleanor looked down at Lily, who was contentedly playing with the beaded necklace Eleanor wore, the one containing Key's protection stone. The child seemed utterly at peace, unaware of the tension surrounding her. Looking back up at her visitors, Eleanor made her decision. I appreciate your concern truly, but my answer remains the same. This is our home. Mr. Yazzie is Lily's guardian as much as I am. We stay. Mrs. Clark's face hardened. Then I'm afraid we must consider the welfare of the child separately from your own choices. Eleanor's blood ran cold. What does that mean? It means, Reverend Clark said solemnly, that we have a responsibility to ensure children are raised in godly households. If you won't remove her from this situation voluntarily, we may be forced to seek official intervention. You're threatening to take my child? Eleanor's voice rose slightly, causing Lily to look up at her in concern. Not threatening, Mrs. Clark corrected primly. Simply informing you of the likely consequences of your decision. The Indian agent has authority in these matters, particularly concerning white children living in native households. Eleanor stood, clutching Lily to her chest. Get out, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Get out of our home, now. Dawson shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Miller, they're just trying to... I said, get out! Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip. You come here uninvited, insult the man who saved us, threaten to steal my child, all in the name of Christian charity. Get out before Mr. Yazzie returns and finds you trespassing. The implied threat worked. Though Eleanor knew Key was unlikely to respond with violence, the visitors clearly harbored different assumptions about Indian savagery. This isn't over, Reverend Clark warned, as they retreated toward the door. We'll be back with proper authority. Tell whoever you like that I am here by choice, Eleanor replied, following them outside, that my daughter is safe and loved, that anyone who tries to separate us will answer to me before they ever face Mr. Yazzie. She stood tall, a far cry from the broken woman who had stumbled through the snow 5 months earlier. The visitors mounted their horses, Mrs. Clark shooting one last disapproving glance at the Hogan. We pray you'll reconsider, Mrs. Miller, the Reverend said. For the child's sake. I pray you'll learn the difference between judgment and compassion, Eleanor retorted. Good day. She watched them ride away, maintaining her composure until they disappeared over the ridge. Then her knees weakened, and she sank to the ground, cradling Lily against her as tears of fury and fear streamed down her face. They won't take you, she whispered fiercely to her daughter. Never, I promise. But as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Eleanor's initial defiance gave way to practical worry. Could they really take Lily from her? She knew little of frontier law, but had heard stories of native children forcibly removed from their families, placed in mission schools or with white families to be civilized. Would they do the same to a white child they perceived as being raised improperly? The thought was unbearable. By the time Key returned at dusk, Eleanor had worked herself into a state of heightened anxiety. The moment she saw him riding over the ridge, she ran to meet him, Lily in her arms, the words tumbling out before he had even dismounted. They came from the mission. They threatened to take Lily, said it wasn't over. Key slid from his horse and caught her shoulders, steadying. Slower, he said calmly. Tell me everything. Inside the Hogan, with Lily settled on her play blanket, Eleanor recounted the visitor's words and threats, trying to recall every detail. Key listened without interruption, his expression grave, but composed. They said they'd return with the Indian agent, she concluded, that he has authority over children in native households. Can they really take her, Key, legally? Key was silent for a long moment, absently stroking the carved flute. He often played in the evenings. Finally, he looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers directly. The white man's law is not always just, he said carefully. But it is powerful. The agent could cause trouble, yes. Eleanor's heart sank. Then what do we do? Key set the flute aside and leaned forward. There are two paths before us. We can leave, go deeper into Navajo territory, where the agent's reach is weaker. Or we can face them, make them see the truth. "What did your clan say today?" Eleanor asked, suddenly remembering his visit. "How did they react to the news?" A ghost of a smile touched Key's lips. "Better than your missionaries. My mother's sister said the spirits work in strange ways, that perhaps you were sent to heal my solitude." He paused. "They wished to meet you and the child." Despite everything, Eleanor felt a warm glow of acceptance. "I'd like that. But what about the mission people? The agent?" "Tomorrow," Key said, with quiet determination, "we will go to Fort Defiance ourselves. Before they come to us, we will speak our truth in the open, not hiding." Eleanor stared at him, shocked by the suggestion. "You want to go directly to them? Isn't that dangerous for you?" "Perhaps," Key acknowledged, "but facing danger openly is better than waiting for it to find you sleeping." He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his grip warm and sure. "Eleanor, do you trust me?" In this man's hands, she had placed her life and her child's from the moment he found them in the snow. Through months of healing, learning, and gradual understanding, that trust had only deepened. "With everything," she answered simply. Key nodded once, decisive. "Then we will face this together, as a family." The word hung in the air between them, the first time either had used it to describe what they had become. Not just two adults and a child sharing space out of necessity, but a family, bound by choice and care and growing love. Eleanor squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his steadiness. Whatever confrontations lay ahead, they would meet them not separately but as one. The outside world might not understand what they had built together, might try to tear it apart with prejudice and misguided authority. But in this moment, in the warm circle of the Hogan, with Lily babbling happily beside them, their shared determination formed a shield stronger than any legal argument or social pressure. "A family," Eleanor repeated softly. "Yes, that's exactly what we are." Dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed too beautiful for a day of confrontation. Eleanor dressed with care, selecting her best dress, one she had mended and modified during the winter months, adding Navajo-inspired embroidery to the collar and cuffs. She wanted to present herself with dignity, to show through her appearance that she was neither captive nor destitute. Key prepared as well, not in white man's clothing as Eleanor had half expected, but in his finest traditional garments, a beautifully woven shirt, silver and turquoise at his wrists, his hair bound with a decorated leather strip. He would face the authorities as himself, proud and unapologetic. "Are you certain about this?" Eleanor asked as she secured Lily in the cradleboard Key had made. The baby was alert, her dark eyes watching everything with characteristic intensity. "What if they try to arrest you or take Lily?" Key checked the provisions in his saddlebags, water, food, medicines in case they were delayed. "They will try to make us afraid," he said. "Fear is their weapon. We must not give it power." His calm certainty steadied Eleanor's nerves. This was the man who had carried her through a blizzard, who had nursed her and Lily back to health, who had taught her to weave stories into blankets and courage into her heart. If he believed this confrontation was necessary, she would trust his judgment. They set out as the sun cleared the mountain peaks, Key on his horse with Lily's cradleboard secured before him, Eleanor riding the gentler mare he had traded for during the spring. The journey to Fort Defiance would take most of the day, following trails that wound through arroyos and across mesas, always heading northwest. As they rode, Eleanor rehearsed what she would say to the Indian agent, to the missionaries, to anyone who questioned their family. She would be calm but firm, dignified but uncompromising. She would make them understand that her place was with Key, that Lily belonged with both of them, that love and respect were more important than social conventions or racial boundaries. Mid-morning, they stopped to rest the horses and feed Lily. Sitting in the shade of a massive cottonwood tree, Eleanor voiced the worry that had been nagging at her since they set out. What if they separate us when we arrive? What if they won't let us speak together? Key considered this, his expression thoughtful. They may try, he acknowledged. If so, remember what we have discussed. Speak your truth without anger. The child is yours by birth, mine by choice and care. We offer her 2 worlds, not one. This is strength, not weakness. Eleanor nodded, committing his words to memory. And if they ask about us, about our relationship, this was territory they had circled, but never directly addressed. What were they to each other? More than rescuer and rescued, more than teacher and student, more than simply 2 adults sharing the care of a child. But they had never put it into words, never formalized what had grown between them through the winter's isolation and spring's awakening. Key met her gaze directly. I will speak the truth, he said simply, that you are the mother of my heart's child, that my home is yours for as long as you wish it, that among my people actions forge stronger bonds than ceremonies. The answer both warmed Eleanor and left her slightly unsettled. It wasn't a proposal, not in the white man's sense, but it was a declaration of commitment, one that transcended the legal trappings she had been raised to expect. Is that enough? She asked softly. In their eyes, I mean? Perhaps not, Key admitted, but we cannot live our truth through their eyes. They continued their journey, the landscape gradually changing as they rode northwest. More scrubland, fewer trees, the colors shifting from the greenery of their protected valley to the reds and yellows of open desert. By mid-afternoon, they spotted the first signs of Fort Defiance in the distance, a small cluster of buildings surrounded by a wooden stockade, the American flag visible even from afar. Eleanor felt her heart rate increase. There was still time to turn back, to retreat to their valley, perhaps even to follow Key's alternative suggestion and move deeper into Navajo territory. But that would mean a life of looking over their shoulders, of treating Lily as something to hide, rather than celebrate. No, they had made the right decision. Better to face the conflict directly than to let it fester and grow. As they approached the fort's gates, Eleanor straightened her back and lifted her chin. Key rode beside her, his posture equally proud but relaxed, a man comfortable in his own skin, regardless of whose territory he entered. A sentry called out as they neared, "State your business." "We seek an audience with the Indian agent," Key replied in clear English, "and with Reverend Clark of the mission." The sentry's eyes widened slightly as he took in the unusual pair, a Navajo man in traditional dress and a white woman in frontier, clothing with Navajo touches, a baby secured in a cradleboard. "Wait here," he instructed, disappearing through the gates. Several tense minutes passed before he returned with another man, older, grey-bearded, wearing the uniform of a government official, the Indian agent, Eleanor presumed. "Mr. Yazzie," the man said, nodding to Key with what seemed like familiarity. "Wasn't expecting to see you today." His gaze shifted to Eleanor, curiosity evident in his expression. "And you must be Mrs. Miller. Reverend Clark mentioned you." "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, meeting his gaze steadily. "My daughter and I have come with Mr. Yazzie to address some concerns that were raised during a recent visit to our home." The agent's eyebrows rose at her choice of words. "Our home." But he made no comment on it. "I see. Well, you'd better come inside. The Reverend will want to join us, I expect." They were led through the gates into the fort proper, a dusty courtyard surrounded by various buildings, soldiers and civilians alike. turned to stare as they passed, some with open hostility, others merely curious. Eleanor kept her eyes forward, focusing on the back of the agent's head rather than the judgmental gazes around them. They were shown to a small office in the main building, furnished with a desk, several chairs, and little else. Maps of the territory decorated the walls, along with official-looking documents in frames. "Please sit," the agent offered, gesturing to the chairs. "I'll send for Reverend Clark." Once they were alone, Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "He seemed to know you," she whispered to Key. "We have traded in the past," Key explained quietly. "He is not the worst of them. He listens sometimes before deciding." This was encouraging news. Eleanor had feared they would face nothing but prejudice and closed minds. The door opened to admit Reverend Clark, followed closely by his wife and the agent. Mrs. Clark's face registered shock when she saw Lily contentedly perched on Key's lap, reaching for the silver buttons on his shirt. "Mrs. Miller," the Reverend began without preamble, "I'm pleased you've reconsidered our offer of assistance." "I haven't," Eleanor replied calmly. "We've come to address the threats made against our family and to clarify our situation before any misguided actions are taken." The Reverend's expression hardened. "I made no threats, merely informed you of legal realities concerning the welfare of the child." The agent cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should all take a step back. I'm Agent Howard Thompson. I understand. There's some concern about the living arrangements of Mrs. Miller and her daughter?" "Indeed," Mrs. Clark interjected. "The woman is living in a heathen dwelling with a man not her husband, exposing an innocent child to all manner of inappropriate influences." Eleanor felt a flash of anger but controlled it. "Mr. Yazzie saved my life and my daughter's when we were abandoned by my husband this past winter. He has provided us with shelter, food, and protection when no one else would. There is nothing inappropriate about his care for us." "While the initial rescue was commendable," Reverend Clark said, his tone condescending, "continued cohabitation outside the bonds of matrimony raises serious moral questions." "Perhaps in your eyes," Eleanor countered. "But I would argue that abandoning a woman and newborn in a blizzard raises far more serious moral questions than offering them sanctuary." Agent Thompson leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Miller, no one disputes that Mr. Yazzie did a Christian thing in saving you, but surely you understand how unusual your situation appears. A white woman living with a Navajo man, raising a child together. It raises eyebrows, to say the least." "I understand that perfectly well," Eleanor acknowledged. "What I don't understand is why the happiness and welfare of my daughter should be sacrificed to satisfy social conventions. The child needs proper Christian upbringing," Mrs. Clark insisted. "The child needs love, safety, and respect," Eleanor countered, "all of which she receives in abundance from both myself and Mr. Yazzie." Throughout this exchange, Key had remained silent, his attention focused on Lily, who was beginning to fuss. Now he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying authority. "In my tradition," he said, "a child belongs to the mother's clan. The mother decides what is best. Eleanor has chosen our home for her daughter. This should be respected." Agent Thompson turned his attention to Key. "Mr. Yazzie, your reputation among the traders is solid. You've always dealt fairly, but you must see how this situation could be misinterpreted by those who look with eyes but not hearts," Key replied. "Yes, I see this." "The law doesn't concern itself with hearts," Reverend Clark interjected. "It deals with facts. And the fact is, this arrangement is irregular at best, immoral at worst." "What law prohibits a woman from choosing her own home?" Eleanor demanded. "What law says a child must be separated from loving guardians simply because one is Navajo?" A tense silence followed her questions. Finally, Agent Thompson sighed. "No specific law, perhaps, but customs, societal expectations." "Customs that would see my daughter and me dead in the snow?" Eleanor interrupted. "No. I reject those customs. Entirely, Mrs. Clark made a sound of disapproval. Such disrespect for tradition. This is precisely why the child needs proper guidance. Mrs. Clark, Eleanor said, struggling to maintain her composure, I respect traditions that honor life and dignity. I cannot respect those that would value propriety over a child's happiness. Agent Thompson rubbed his beard thoughtfully. Mrs. Miller, what exactly are you proposing here? That you continue living with Mr. Yazzie indefinitely? What happens when the child is older, begins asking questions? We will answer them honestly, Eleanor replied. We will teach her that family is defined by love and commitment, not by blood alone or by what others deem acceptable. And what of her spiritual education? Reverend Clark pressed. Will she be raised as a Christian or as a heathen? Key's expression darkened slightly at the end, but he remained calm. She will learn both ways, he said. The Jesus path and the beauty way. Then she will choose what speaks to her heart. This response clearly disturbed the missionaries, but Agent Thompson seemed to be considering it seriously. It's an unusual proposition, he said, but not without precedent. There have been cases of cross-cultural households, particularly in border territories. Surely you're not endorsing this arrangement? Mrs. Clark exclaimed. Agent Thompson held up a hand. I'm merely observing that the situation is complex. Mrs. Miller is clearly not being held against her will. The child appears healthy and well cared for. Mr. Yazzie has a record of honest dealings with the fort. But they're not married, Mrs. Clark insisted, as if this single fact overrode all other considerations. A heavy silence fell over the room. Eleanor glanced at Key, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. Would that resolve your concerns? Eleanor asked finally. If we were married? The question hung in the air, charged with implications. She hadn't discussed this with Key, hadn't planned to propose such a solution, yet it seemed the simplest way to address the missionaries' most vocal objection. A Christian marriage might address certain moral considerations, Reverend Clark allowed, though he looked uncomfortable with the suggestion. But there remained questions of cultural compatibility, proper environment for the child. I believe, Agent Thompson interrupted, that we should discuss this further. Perhaps Mrs. Miller and Mr. Yazzie could remain at the fort overnight while we consider all aspects of the situation. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Key, who nodded, almost imperceptibly. We would be agreeable to that, she said, provided we remain together with our daughter. This condition clearly displeased the Clarks, but Agent Thompson nodded. I'll arrange suitable accommodations. We'll reconvene in the morning. As the others filed out, leaving them momentarily alone, Eleanor turned to Key, anxiety written across her features. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to suggest, to presume. Key touched her hand briefly, the gesture hidden from any observers by Lily's cradleboard. You spoke from the heart, he said. There is no wrong in that. But marriage, it's not something we've discussed. I don't even know if you would want— Tonight, he interrupted gently. We will talk about these things tonight, when there are no listening ears but our own. The accommodations provided were basic but clean, a small room in the visitors' quarters with a narrow bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a wash basin. Eleanor settled Lily for the night, while Key sat by the window, watching the fort's activities wind down as darkness fell. When Lily was finally asleep, Eleanor joined him, pulling the second chair close. You've been quiet, she observed. Are you angry about what I suggested? Key turned from the window, his expression softened by the lamplight. Not angry, he assured her. Thinking. About marriage, Eleanor prompted. About bridges between worlds, he clarified. When I found you in the snow, I did not foresee this path, that we would stand together before white authorities, considering their ways of binding lives. Eleanor studied his face, trying to read what lay beneath his measured words. Does the idea displease you? Key was silent for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "Among my people," he said finally, "marriage is not one ceremony, one moment. It is built through days living together, sharing food, tending the same fire. It is recognized by the clan, blessed by the elders. In these ways we have already begun." The implication sent warmth spreading through Eleanor's chest. "You consider us already on the path to marriage?" "By my way, yes," Key affirmed. "But I understand that your world needs different signs, different words." "And you would be willing to speak those words?" "For Lily's sake?" Eleanor asked, her heart thumping painfully against her ribs. Key reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "Not only for the child," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "For you, for us, if that is what you wish." Eleanor's throat tightened with emotion. This wasn't how she had imagined a proposal, if it could even be called that. No romantic declarations, no bended knee. Just two people who had found each other against all odds, choosing to forge a path forward together. "I wish it," she said simply. "I wish it with all my heart." Key's fingers tightened around hers, his eyes holding a warmth that needed no translation across cultural boundaries. "Then, tomorrow," he said, "we will tell them. We will build this bridge together." As moonlight streamed through the small window, casting silver patterns across the floor of their temporary shelter, Eleanor felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The journey from that desperate night in the snow to this moment had been neither straight nor easy. There would be more challenges ahead, prejudices to face, boundaries to cross, a daughter to raise between two worlds. But they would face it. Altogether, this family forged not in conventional circumstances, but in the crucible of survival and blossoming love. And in that unity lay a strength that neither the harsh judgment of society nor the well-meaning interference of authorities could ever truly break. Outside, the desert night sang its ancient song of endurance, of life persisting against all odds. Inside, three hearts beat as one, bound by ties stronger than blood, stronger than custom, stronger even than law. The unbreakable bonds of chosen family. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.